You know the difference, I'm sure, since I'm a journalist among scientists, between a scientist and a journalist. Let me see if I can get this right. A scientist knows more and more about less and less until he or she knows everything about nothing. Whereas a journalist knows less and less about more and more until he or she knows nothing about everything. I think I've got it right. So, basically, I'm a know-nothing. I'm not presenting a scientific paper like everybody else. Instead of all these beautifully presented and well worked out and refereed papers, what I produce is scribbled like this, and I would have trouble reading it. So it's definitely journalistic impressions rather than a scientific paper. And I'm really going to confine myself within this huge field just to the cell phone Wi-Fi issues, because that's the nothing I know most about. I'm sorry, that's the everything. That's the bit of everything I know most nothing about. Put it that way. But I'm interested in it. This seems to me the most enormous issue, and the odds against you, I agree, are enormous. But it does seem to me that in Europe at least, and maybe here too, there is a chance for breakthrough on this particular issue. And I've been here many, many times over the 40 years. I've been tackling this field in other areas. Sorry, I'm making a mess of this, I've always tried, apart from covering all things everybody else is covering, to be out in front, tackling some issue that people are not doing, and something which did seem to need a bit of publicity, a bit of public attention behind it. And so I try to come in to an issue before it reaches anywhere near the breaking point, where things might breakthrough point, but where it seems solid, where scientific evidence is growing, but the public are not aware of it, and nor is government usually, nor is the scientific establishment, and nor are the environmental NGOs, who are often the most conservative lot of the whole bunch, in my experience. And it started with me with asbestos, oddly enough, many, many years ago, where we had as you know, a killer over generations with almost no controls for a very, very long time, particularly in Britain and Europe, where there was a standard called the two-fibre standard, which was developed in Britain and went around the world. And when one looked at it, that standard had been developed in one particular factory in Britain, and it had been done by listening to the chest, I think it's called basal rolls, which are sort of rumblings in the chest, by the company doctor, at exposure to different levels. And the company doctor, it emerged many years later, was deaf, which was quite a clever little operation by the company. None of this was declared in all the papers he produced, may I say. And so the standard went round the world based on a deaf doctor's failure to hear the symptoms of the asbestos exposures that the people were facing. And I happened to write about this. I wrote about a particular factory near where I was working at the time, at the Yorkshire Post, and that was picked up by coincidence by a new member of Parliament who fought it through, and really to his credit, much more than to mine. So I did write about it where I could. We did get that changed in Britain. The standards came crashing down around the world, and asbestos is used very, very much less around the world now, because actually it's uneconomic to produce it at the safety standards that are there. Another one for me was lead in petrol. That was not a problem here because of your introduction of catalytic converters, but it was for us for very many years. And if you think about it, lead being a brain poison that affects children's brains, we achieved a very effective distribution system for it, didn't we? We put it into millions of machines, which ground it up into tiny particles, and then puffed it out into the air all over the country in respirable quantities. And it was a long, long battle to make progress on that. The breakthrough point there, rather like the Hardell study for you, was the work done by a man called Herb Needleman in the States, where he really stood up a very, very careful and very careful, meticulous studies, which looked at very carefully and looked at all the possible variables and came out with something that was copper-bottomed. But in Britain, before they had read the paper, 4 of the 5 top scientists in the field had circulated a paper debunking it, before the paper had been published, before they had read it. went round all the scientific establishment, much more important, went round all the government departments and set things back for quite a while. And Herb took an awful lot of heat, persecution. I think he even had a lawsuit, if I remember rightly, which he had to face over the years. In Britain, it finally boiled down to, we have to see these effects in British children, as if there was this huge physiological difference between the two. I mean, I know there are many differences, but not that. And and that eventually came, and we eventually did it, and eventually it got phased out. But it was a long, long job. Acid rain was another. Global warming. I can remember ringing up the head of the British Meteorological Office 30 years ago who said, climates never change, young man, and human beings could not be possibly responsible for them. This man is now making a fortune going around the world advising people on global warming and the response to it as a private consultant. So there's so many of these, and in a way, I have a feeling for this issue, particularly in the cell phones and Wi-Fi area, that you may be at one of those breaking points. And for the last 2 or 3 years, when I was on The Independent on Sunday, I devoted quite a bit of attention to this. I had real support from my editor, which was based entirely on support from the readers. The breakthrough really was when we did a story, which did very speculatively, because the science wasn't that good. It was very much a sort of, I just fancy that story, about the possibility that cell phone radiation might be affected in the coronary collapse disorder of bees. That had more downloads than any story we'd ever published in the paper. And that's what got the editor interested. So we then kept going very strongly on the issue. And then I moved to the Daily Telegraph very recently. It was a surprise move for me. I never expected in all my life for that to happen. It's a conservative paper, whereas I've always worked on liberal papers before. But they came to me and said, we want to go green, we want to change the way we're doing things, and would you come and do it? So the challenge I couldn't really resist. So we've done a little bit in the Telegraph since I went there, and some of my colleagues are going to pick it up there, which is good, and we can talk about that later if people want to. Now in Britain, we were way out ahead on this issue in analysing the problem. In the year 2000, we had a committee called the Stewart Committee, which was headed by a man called Sir William Stewart, who was the government's chief scientist, I mean, rather like John Holdren here, a big figure. And he assembled many of the great and the good in this field, including some names that may surprise you, which I'll come back to later. And they produced a report, as I say, in the year 2000, which really flagged up the potential dangers from cell phones. And it made some very good recommendations, many of them. I won't give you them all, but one was discouraging children from using cell phones, stopping industry, promoting them to the young, publishing SARS levels prominently on boxes preferably. Now I know SARS is now not necessarily the best measurement, and there are issues about it, but at that time it was what they had, it was a benchmark they set down. Stopping the building of masts near schools, except when the parents and teachers all agreed that should happen. And subjecting, this is rather like what you were saying, Deb, the setting up of masts to the normal democratic planning procedures. In Britain, we have quite good planning procedures. Anything you do, from putting an extension on your house to building a nuclear power station, you have to have permission from local government. The public has a full chance to object and participate, and if it's a really contentious issue, it goes to full public open inquiry, which everyone can have their say. They usually go in favour of the developers, but it's still the issue. The process is there, and every so often you get a surprise and it goes the other way. Now, in Britain, cell phones have been, phone masts have been exempted from this process for years. And as long as your mast is under 15 metres high, you don't have to go to the system. All you have to do is to tell, I said in Britain, actually this is in England. In Scotland and Ireland, it is different. It's the same system. All you have to do is to give notice to the council that you're going to build this thing, and unless they object within 56 days, why 56 days I don't know, it goes ahead. And